Okay. First Peter. Now, do what I always do is just kind of set the book up, right? Give us some introduction material. This First Peter is set among what most people call the general epistles. Can anybody tell me? So First Peter is regarded as a general epistle for the most part. Can anybody else tell me any more that's in that group? What other books would be considered general epistles? Epistle means what, by the way? Okay, a letter. So anybody give me another general epistle, maybe? Okay, James? Huh? No. Okay, Hebrews, 1st, 2nd Peter, James,
John.
1st, 2nd, 3rd John, Jude. Okay, all those. Hebrews, you're going to find, sometimes it's in the list of general, but some people leave them out. Yeah, it's really not. We'll just throw it in. We'll say Hebrews is a part of those letters. All right, so now, I know you can tell me who the author of 1 Peter is. Peter? Yeah, Peter. He's got a couple of other names in the Bible. Oh, yes, sir.
It says in mine the letter of John, Revelations.
Revelation would be a general epistle? Is that what that's saying?
It's saying the letter of John, Revelation.
Oh.
Revelation. I'm just asking.
Yeah, I haven't heard that Revelation is actually a general epistle. I mean, it could be because of it's so different in nature. Revelation is that usually people don't come.
It's not in the book together. I mean, it's
yeah.
Letter. I just seen that. That's it in the introduction. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's interesting though. No, I didn't even know that. I'd like to know the list of where people put their books and whatnot, and how they categorize them.
Well, that's in that. This is in that apologetic press file. So I'm just.
Well, interesting. Okay. All right. Nice. Regardless of where it is, obviously we're all agreed that Revelation is definitely of a different nature. It's a whole different ballgame, right, than First Peter would be. All right. So Peter's got a couple of other names that he's called by or known by. And what would those be?
Simon.
All right, Simon and Cephas, right? Now, Simon would be his given name. And when you get to John chapter number 1, we find where Jesus actually gives him the name Cephas, which is an Aramaic name. And Cephas means what? Stone, yeah. And John tells us, translated as a stone. And the Greek equivalent to Cephas is Peter, which means stone. Same thing. And so he just became, we don't have a verse that says, and all of a sudden, the disciples were calling him Peter. It just seems like at some point when Jesus names him Cephas, and then the Greek equivalent, that being a common language there, it just got, the name Peter just got picked up, and that's what he is most known by. And that's why he says in verse 1 here, in the first chapter, he doesn't say Cephas, he doesn't say Simon, he says, he introduces himself as Peter. That's what Christians would have known him by. So, of the original 12 apostles, Peter's probably the most well-known one, right? I would say, and this is my opinion, more well-known than even John is. Even though John's got Revelation, John's got 3 letters, and Peter's only got 2, but we really get a lot of information about Peter from the Gospels, don't we? And even though he wrote only 2 letters, I feel like most Christians have a good grasp about what kind of guy Peter was, what kind of man he was, right? Don't you? Do you feel that way? Like, yeah, I know a lot about Peter. No? Yes? Yeah, sort of. Could you write? How many pages could you write on Peter? Go ahead.
John has the reputation as being the one that Jesus loved.
Yes.
But Jesus loved Peter as well.
Oh, sure, yeah, Pete.
And I can't understand why John is getting more credit there than Peter is.
Get a little more love than Peter is?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. I've never really thought about it. I have to imagine that Jesus, well, even James, I guess John does stick out in that way. He's the disciple whom he loved, right? John happened to be at the foot of the cross, and it's thought that that's who Peter was talking to about take care of his mother, right, from the cross would be John. Most think that it was John. You got to remember, Jesus did have a human side to him. And I would imagine part of that, Jesus's humanity, also what came along with that was also, you kind of, I don't know, you tend to gravitate or you think more of somebody or you connect with other people more so than you do with than somebody else, even though you would love them as well. Does that make sense? I mean, I don't want to dumb Jesus's deity down to that point, but you know, and he also had there's two others, the three disciples that he would take with him to the transfiguration, right? And would be Peter, James, and John. So it seemed like those three definitely had a some sort of, I don't want to say better relationship with Jesus, but some sort of stronger bond or relationship with Jesus than the other apostles did for whatever reason. But yeah, that's a good thought. I don't know. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Have you read anything good on that?
Could they have been with him the longest out of all of them?
Maybe was John with him out of the longest? I don't know.
For them to be the three closest to Christ.
Weren't
They
James,
have been with
Peter,
him
James,
longer.
and John were some of the first disciples that he called.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know why that is.
Just a thought.
Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing it up. Thanks for confusing me. I appreciate that.
It seems to me like there was more interaction between Peter and Jesus than there was between John and Jesus.
Of what's recorded, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree with that. Which is why we know more. Feel like we know more about Peter, right? And so Peter is the author. Now, some are going to argue, well, now this gets even above my pay grade, where the Greek. Some will say there's no way Peter wrote 1 Peter because the Greek is too good. And who was Peter but a Galilean fisherman? Galilean fishermen don't write like this. They say it's got to be somebody else. Well, you know what? From the time Peter was called by Jesus, and you go all the way to when he would have wrote this, which is probably about 35 years or so after the cross. I mean, is it possible that Peter learned a little bit? I mean, in 3 decades of being an apostle and having the miraculous endowment of the Holy Spirit. I mean, you got to think that. So that argument is just kind of weird. And even Peter did it. When you go to the very end of the book, Peter is actually, and this is very common, Peter had someone transcribing it. And I'm not saying the Silvanus or Silas there in 512 is actually changed his word. Like Peter was just speaking a bunch of nonsense. And so Silas was like, I think we wrote that a little bit differently there. Put it out there. But I think it's quite possible that Silas would have done something a little here and there. If Peter didn't know the Greek, would have made it in such a way where it would have been more readable or something like that. And it wouldn't have anything to do, mess with any kind of inspiration, nothing like that. But anyways, no real evidence that exists, no good evidence. And remember, every book of the Bible is up for scrutiny when it comes to who wrote it and when they wrote it and things like this. And a lot of this didn't come about until in the later years, the last couple hundred years or so, where everyone's kind of wants to discredit the Bible and because of the things that it teaches. And so the best way to do that is to start undermining the authorship of it, who actually wrote it, who actually penned it, and when it was penned and things like that. And they do that with the Old Testament too. So, I mean, when it says, look, I mean, great day. When it says Peter, I'm writing this. Peter, I'm writing this to the pilgrims. I'm writing. I mean, great day. Can't we just, Peter wrote it. And what makes Peter interesting too is that he is one of the few New Testament characters, maybe the only, I don't know, where we can actually track their growth as a follower of Christ. And so we get him from where he's a baby, right? A babe in Christ, so to speak, as a follower, and then we get to learn all about him and learn his weaknesses and learn his strengths, and then through the Gospels, and then learn a lot about him in the very end of the Gospels, right, with his betrayal, and then when Jesus is talking to him about, do you love me, do you love me, do you love me? And then in the book of Acts, we see his growth, like, wow, he really matures, really grows. Obviously, he's got the Holy Spirit in Acts 2, but he's preaching, and then we see some more of his weaknesses in the book of Galatians, chapter 2, and then towards the end of his life, we would most think, now we're getting a lot of what was going on in Peter's head and the amazing truths that he's able to pin down and write to Christians in 1st and 2nd Peter, which is I think it's pretty neat. These books right here are going to add to what we already know about Peter, on top of what he's teaching us, just about the faith in general. So it's pretty neat. Now, the context of the book, any comments about Peter?
I was just curious, like, I heard something about somebody saying that the disciples would have been pretty young men when Jesus called them.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, like, maybe how old, you said it's about 30 years after the cross.
Yeah, roughly 30, 35 years.
So I was just wondering, like, maybe, it is interesting to see his growth. Obviously, all of us grow and mature as we get older. I was just wondering how old he might have been.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. The only clue that I could give you that we know he was married, right? And so, but he could have been married at, I don't know, what 18 to 20 years old, or he could have waited till he was 30 something. I don't know, probably not. But I don't know. I never really thought about his age. I've never thought about any of the disciples' ages, actually, how old they would have been. Probably pretty young. By our standards, when he wrote this, I would say he's young. And when Paul died, I would say I don't think they would have been old men. Now, tradition says that John was the only one who died of an old age, and who knows how old he would have been. But interesting. What their age might have been. Good, Tom.
They call it impetuous, and from what someone said, as he see how he matured and all, but the things he did, which you think, well, this young man in chapter conclusions, he jumped in to do things such as jump out of to walk on the water.
Yeah.
Said, I'll never forsake you.
Mm-hmm.
And, different things he did, and he cut off Malchus's ear in the garden. And,
Mm-hmm.
things he did
Very quick to act, right?
Right.
Yeah, so some of his actions wouldn't lead us to believe that he acts like a young guy, doesn't really have a lot of experience in life, doesn't have a lot of wisdom, right? He kind of acts that way, at least in our day, as we would think, younger people just good people, but, they act like they don't have any experience, which they don't.
It's still a good study, to think about the things he did, but yet he delivered the message. One of the ones he delivered the message on the day of Pentecost.
Yeah.
We read about that, and he did grow, and he had these weaknesses or things that he had to overcome, such as we do.
Mm-hmm.
And,
He's very relatable. Even though we don't, we might not. Some people might share his weaknesses, and faults. Some might not, but it still doesn't matter. It's still relatable, very relatable, isn't he? A New Testament character.
Paul had to call him out because his situation with the Jews and Gentiles.
He was showing prejudice. Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah. We know Peter was very well loved by the church too, and I think it's Acts 12 where someone thinks where the church is praying for him, he gets thrown in. I think it's Acts 12. I might be wrong about that.
You know, we studied that he was highly esteemed in the church of Jerusalem.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he was. He was. Very much so. Now, the context of the book is important, and I know we say context all the time. I want you to make sure you understand what, like, we get context, right? You understand what I mean by context. So if I were to say something like, if I were to ask you, if a man approached your car wanting a ride, would you give it to him? Now, on one hand, what we ought to be asking is, there's no context there. And so depending on the context is whether you're going to answer yes or no, right? Well, who's the man? He's some weird dude. Did he just rob a bank? Well, then your answer is probably going to be no. Is he your dad that needs to ride home? Well, then your answer will probably yes. And so your answer is going to depend. Do you need more context there? Let's say someone's, maybe you catch the end of a story or something. Somebody's telling a story, and they say, and then they yell fire. Well, would you have full understanding of exactly what they're saying? Well, you wouldn't know whether they're talking about somebody yelling at in a crowded movie theater or someone talking about on the battlefield, right? And it's very, very different. So you would need more context to understand what's going on and have a clear understanding of what's being said. It's the same thing when you approach the Bible. You really need to, we got to have context. You got to know the context. And the context of like who's the audience. And we can easily just say, well, they were Christians, and they were, but Christians going through what? What were they dealing with? In 1 Peter, we find that suffering is a huge theme throughout the whole book. Suffering. Now, and this was written. Some are going to want to say Peter's letter is to the Jews only, which I don't agree with. And I think it's to the Jews and Gentiles. And as we go through, I'll point out in chapters 1 and 2, I'll point out some verses that seem to be like those have to be Gentiles he's talking to. But these Christians were in the midst of suffering for their faith. Now, some have said that the suffering is the scarlet thread that runs through the letter. Y'all have heard of the scarlet thread that runs through the Bible? Have y'all heard something like that before? Which would be what? I feel like I've told y'all this before. The scarlet thread would be Jesus Christ, redemption. Really, redemption would probably be a better way to describe it. Redemption, all the way, man's redemption, all the way through the Bible, is the scarlet thread. Suffering seems to be the scarlet thread that runs through this particular letter, and you'll see this as we go through. It's in almost every chapter, minus a little bit out of chapter number 2. But in every chapter, we're going to see some suffering. Now, I think this is something that people can relate to because we all go through some kind of suffering. Now, what we tend to do is jump to a conclusion. We say, well, I can't relate to early Christian suffering because, and the only thing that a lot of people know about early Christian suffering is like being fed to lions or something like that. And like, well, that's not happening to us. I'm not getting put on a pole and lit up to use as lamps, dipped in oil and things like that. So we can't relate to this kind of thing. But we can, because this kind of suffering that they are dealing with is not that kind of suffering that most people connect with Christianity, with early Christianity. Because as you read through the letter, there doesn't really seem to be any kind of evidence that would point to this overarching government that is persecuting them and ripping them out of their homes and things like that. We don't read of anything. We don't read of them getting whipped or beaten or stoned or killed or anything like that. No governmental interference is going on right here as far as we can tell. And I would say not yet anyways. I think obviously later in Christianity that's coming for Christians, but not here. Not here. Their suffering seems to be simply like slander, it's mistreatment, it's discrimination by their non-Christian neighbors. That's what it is. I would say pretty harsh treatment, mistreatment, but that's what it is, like social, social exclusion. Like they're not wanting to deal with these Christians, and they're getting mocked and things like that. Now, is that something that we can relate to? I think, yes. I think that is the kind of suffering that brings it more close to home for us today. Because we know that happens. If you are trying to be faithful, you get that. You are going to get that in some form or another. And I'm not saying it's going to be as harsh as what they were going through, but you will get that. And it hurts, And plus, we are quite aware that we live in we're living right now in an increasingly tolerant society where everybody, doesn't matter what you believe about what. We're supposed to honor it and accept it, tolerate it, and include it, right?
Unless you're a New Testament Christian. Then you don't get.
Yeah. Unless you're, minus Christianity, and you're supposed to get thrown under the bus. Yeah, that seems to be the case. It's a very weird thing. But towards Christian morals and Christian truths and principles and things like that, I'm going to talk a little bit about this Sunday night, Lord willing. We're living in that kind of world. Obviously we're praying every day and every year that something happens where we start shifting back toward biblical morals, but it doesn't seem to be that case. And, everyone puts their hopes on the next, whoever the next governor or the next president is. And I don't know. I mean, more power to them, but it's going to take a whole lot more than that. And so we know that people, and we've read it in the papers, their jobs, people losing their jobs and their reputation gets hurt. And a lot of this happens because of social media. But people are getting hurt and harmed and things like this because of publicly standing up for biblical morals. They're standing against immoral things in our culture today. And as first century Christians, if they were faithful, that's exactly what they were doing. They were saying no when they say no, and then they were telling people, which is going to be judging on people, but they're telling people what to do to be saved and what they should not do. Now, so 1 Peter, this letter, admittedly, is going to hit home more so for like third world Christians today, who may be living in a way more hostile environment than we are. I mean, despite all of the stuff going on social media, and especially in a little place like this, like where we live, a lot of this stuff hasn't reached here yet. We're not having to deal with that. We don't have, I think the closest, remember all the protests and stuff were going on? The closest that got to us was what? Like Johnson City?
Aberdeen. Maybe
In Boone, in Abington. So you have to drive to actually see what you're seeing on the news. Well, for a lot of people, it's not like that. It's like right down the street. But in a third world country, maybe where Christians are living more closely in times like Peter's audience was, this would mean a whole lot more to them. Now, and I'm not saying that this is not going to mean something for us. But what this letter is going to do is to help us, is prepare us with the kind of mindset that we would need if, God forbid, we ever find ourselves in a suffering situation like this. And I think that's a lot of what Christianity is about, is preparing ourselves when times get rough. And a lot of times when times get rough, we haven't done a good job of preparing ourselves, and we lose our head. We don't know how to act, and just like the world's falling apart, and like Humpty Dumpty kind of stuff, and no one can put us back together again. But it's this kind of book that's going to prepare us to deal with tough things in life. And it might not come from non-Christians. It just might be dealing with tough things in life, period. And I think this is a good book for that. So these any comments? So these Christians were experiencing what it was like to live among people that were willing to make life hard for them and willing to mistreat them simply because of what they believed. and they were looking for answers. They needed someone like Peter to write them a letter to help them out. They want answers. They want positive answers. And so this letter would have been like, just try to put yourself in their shoes, and you get this letter and you're reading through it, and it must have been like, I've been, some of our songs we sing don't they get emotional sometimes? I mean, if you're really listening to the song and maybe you got something going on, some of our hymns that we sing they get very personal. And, you might have shed a tear or two a time when songs are sung. I was thinking maybe that this letter, this makes sense to me. I don't know exactly how they did it, but this makes sense to me that they would receive a letter and somebody, maybe the guy, one of the elders, we know that this congregation, they would have had elders, because he addresses that in chapter 5, but they would have got up and they would have read this letter. And you have to imagine that the whole congregation would have been like on the edge of their seat, waiting to hear some encouraging news from the apostle of Jesus Christ, right? And so this would have been like this. This letter was a breath of fresh air. And imagine the help and the comfort it would have given those Christians. I think it's an amazing thing to think about. Someone wrote this, I'm going to quote it. It says, the case could be made that if one were to be shipwrecked on a desert island and allowed to have only one of the New Testament letters as a companion, then 1 Peter would be the ideal choice. So rich is its teaching, so warm its spirit, and so comforting its message in a hostile environment. I read that and I thought, wow, I've never looked at 1 Peter like that before. Have you? Do you think someone would say that about 1 Peter?
Read that again.
Huh?
Read that again.
You want me to read it again? It says, quote, the case could be made that if one were to be shipwrecked on a desert island and allowed to have only one of the New Testament letters as a companion, then 1 Peter would be the ideal choice. So rich is its teaching, so warm its spirit, and so comforting its message in a hostile environment. I read that and I thought, and I've read 1 Peter before, and I thought, man, I can't wait to get into this book a little bit deeper now, because I want to feel like that. I mean, that guy obviously caught something that I haven't caught in 1 Peter, and I've read it a few times. Huh?
I've always thought that of Acts.
Oh, okay, yeah.
One of my favorite books.
Yeah, we all have our favorite books, right? Yeah. So, if you're ready and willing, I think you're really going to get something out of this study, and I hope you're looking forward to it. Now, I'm not going to get the first one yet. The purpose. There's three things for the letter. One was to encourage Christians through their suffering. 2 was to remind Christians of who they are. And this is a timeless thing. Like, this needs to happen all the time. It's a reminder of the Christian identity. And he's going to use words like special and holy. And it doesn't use this word, but the idea is privileged, very privileged people of God. Christians, he was going to remind them of who they were. And then he was going to instruct them on the proper conduct in their behavior. How am I supposed to respond to people mistreating me? Do I lash out? Do I just take it in silence? Or what? And so he's going to instruct them. And if you remember, a lot of James was about behavior as well, conduct. And Peter is going to pick up on some of that as well. Okay. Any comments so far? You say you haven't even read a verse yet. That's why I ain't got no comments. All right, let's read 1 and 2. It says, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the pilgrims of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, elect according to the foreknowledge of God the Father in sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience and sprinkling of the blood of Jesus Christ, grace to you and peace be multiplied. All right, now I don't know if you got another version of the Bible is going to read a little bit differently, but let's just start with the apostle. Tell me what the word apostle means. Can you define apostle? And give me more than, don't use the name Jesus Christ.
Teacher.
Okay, a teacher. What?
The sojourner.
A sojourner. Okay, well they would be that in the Christian sense. They would be for sure.
Follower.
Okay, a follower.
Student. Student.
Yeah, a student too. Yeah, they sure would be.
Someone sent to accomplish something.
Okay, Dean says all those are right, and Dean's going to add on to that someone who was sent to accomplish something.
John was a forerunner.
Commission.
John was a what now?
Forerunner
Yeah.
of Christ. He was saying there was somebody coming greater than him.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, John was sent in a way, yeah, he sure was. What I want you to get, all of those answers are right, but what I want you to get is that it literally means one who is sent. One who is sent. And that just implies, and you added on to that part, but it implies that they're sent to do something. Sent to do something very, very important. So one who is sent. Pilgrims, you might see the word strangers or exiles, aliens, travelers, even something like that. And what he's doing is, when he's referring to them as Christians, it's just a way to describe Christians living in a non-Christian world. And we'll get into a little more about that. Like, what does it mean to be an alien? What does it mean to be a stranger? And we might bring up Ephesians 2 to help us out with that. But all right, I wanted to just accomplish the introductory material, and I did that. And because I'm not going to rush through the Wednesday night stuff. Sunday morning might be a little different.
Because you're in no hurry to get to Revelation.
I'm no hurry to get to Revelation, not because I don't want to teach it,
Yeah.
but I just got to plan. That's all. But these are, we're New Testament Christians. It makes sense for us to just really sit and digest the New Testament letters, right? And have some good comments and questions and discussion about it. So, all right, we'll pick up with verse 1 when we meet next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.